The October moon cast silver ripples across Willow Creek as 72-year-old Thomas Hartwell waded into the cold water, his weathered boots slipping on the smooth stones beneath. The Arizona Territory autumn had painted the cottonwoods in shades of gold and crimson, but Thomas saw none of the beauty that surrounded him. His eyes, dulled by grief and whiskey, focused only on the deepest part of the creek where the current ran swift and dark. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales from the Old West that will touch your heart and remind you that hope can come from the most unexpected places. Thomas had built his ranch from nothing 50 years earlier, carving a life from the unforgiving desert with little more than determination and backbreaking work. He had married his beloved Martha in 1851, and together they had raised 3 children: Samuel, who died in the war; Rebecca, who succumbed to fever at age 12, and his youngest, Caroline, who had vanished without a trace 15 years ago. The ranch that had once been filled with laughter and purpose now felt like a tomb. Martha had passed 5 years earlier, taking with her the last vestige of joy in Thomas's world. The cattle still grazed his land, tended by hired hands who came and went, but the old rancher found no pleasure in the empire he had built when there was no family left to inherit it. Tonight, as he stood waist-deep in the creek that had provided water for his ranch for half a century, Thomas felt the crushing weight of his loneliness pulling him toward the bottom like iron chains. He had written letters to lawyers in town, leaving his property to the church and his remaining possessions to be sold for charity. There was nothing left to keep him tethered to a world that had taken everything he loved. "Martha," he whispered to the star-filled sky, "I'm coming home to you, darling. I can't carry this burden alone anymore." The water was shockingly cold, even for October, and Thomas felt it seeping through his clothes as he waded deeper. His breathing became labored, partly from the chill and partly from the magnitude of what he was about to do. He had never been a quitter, had never backed down from a challenge, but the silence of his empty house had finally broken something inside him that 50 years of frontier hardship could not. As Thomas prepared to let the current take him, his foot struck something hard on the creek bottom. Instinctively, he reached down to steady himself, and his fingers closed around an object that didn't belong in the natural flow of the water. It was smooth and hard, man-made, and when he lifted it toward the moonlight, he saw that it was a bottle sealed with wax and cork. For a moment, Thomas forgot his dark purpose, curiosity overcoming despair. Bottles didn't appear in Willow Creek by accident. The nearest settlement was 20 miles away, and the creek's source was deep in the mountains where few people ever traveled. Someone had deliberately placed this bottle in the water, and from the way the wax had weathered, it had been there for some time. Thomas waded back toward shore, the bottle clutched in his gnarled hands. The water that had seemed like his final destination now felt cold and unwelcoming, as if the creek itself was pushing him back toward life. He sat heavily on the bank, his legs still dangling in the water, and examined his unexpected discovery. The bottle was green glass, the kind used for medicine or spirits, and it contained what appeared to be a rolled piece of paper. The wax seal bore no identifying marks, but it had protected the contents from the water effectively. Thomas's hands shook as he worked to break the seal, whether from cold or anticipation. He couldn't say. Inside the bottle was indeed a letter, written on paper that had yellowed with age but remained legible in the moonlight. As Thomas unrolled it carefully, his heart nearly stopped. The handwriting was unmistakably familiar, though more mature than when he had last seen it. At the bottom of the page, signed with characteristic flourishes, was a name that made his breath catch in his throat: "Your loving daughter, Caroline." Don't miss what this letter reveals about a father's lost daughter. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to discover the incredible message that changes everything. Thomas's hands trembled violently as he read the opening lines. "My dearest Papa, if you are reading this, then the creek has brought us together one more time, just as it did when I was a little girl learning to fish with you on summer mornings." The letter continued in Caroline's distinctive handwriting, now flowing and confident with maturity. "I know you must wonder what happened to me all those years ago and why I never came home. I pray that someday you will forgive me for the pain I caused, though I know I may not deserve your forgiveness." Thomas felt tears streaming down his weathered cheeks as he read his daughter's words by moonlight. Caroline had been 19 when she disappeared, just after a terrible argument they'd had about her desire to marry a traveling merchant named William Preston. Thomas had forbidden the match, calling Preston a fortune hunter who would take Caroline away from her family and her home. "I was so angry with you that night," the letter continued. "Angry and foolish and convinced that you couldn't understand true love. I ran away with William, believing that we would make our fortune in California and return to show you how wrong you had been. Oh, Papa, how naive I was about the world and about the man I thought I loved." Thomas remembered that terrible night 15 years ago, when he had discovered Caroline's empty room, and the brief note she had left behind saying only that she was following her heart and would write when she could. He had searched for her across 3 territories, hired private investigators, and placed advertisements in dozens of newspapers. But Caroline had vanished as completely as if the earth had swallowed her. "William abandoned me in Denver after 3 months," Caroline's letter revealed. "He took what little money I had brought and left me stranded in a city where I knew no one. I was too proud and too ashamed to come home and admit that you had been right about him. Instead, I tried to make a life for myself, working as a seamstress and later as a teacher in small mining towns throughout Colorado." Thomas could hardly believe what he was reading. His daughter had been alive all these years, struggling to survive in the harsh mining camps of Colorado while he mourned her as dead. The waste of it, the terrible unnecessary separation, made his heart ache with regret. "I met a good man eventually," the letter continued. "A doctor named James Sullivan who saw past my shame and mistakes to the person I was trying to become. We married in 1868 and have 2 children now, your grandchildren whom you have never met. Emma is 12 and looks just like Mama did at that age. And little Thomas is 8 and has your stubborn chin and kind eyes. Grandchildren." Thomas had grandchildren he had never known existed. Children who carried his blood and his name, but had grown up without knowing their grandfather. The revelation was almost too overwhelming to process. "James and I have a medical practice in a town called Cedar Falls, where we serve the mining families and try to bring healing to a place that has seen too much hardship. I teach school there as well, and I think often of the lessons you taught me about reading the land and understanding the rhythms of nature. Everything I am, everything good in me, came from you and Mama." Thomas wiped his eyes with his sleeve, struggling to read through his tears. Caroline had made a good life for herself despite the hardships she had endured. She had found love and purpose and was raising children of her own. The daughter he had mourned as lost had been living and thriving, building exactly the kind of meaningful life he and Martha had hoped she would have. "Papa, I write this letter not knowing if you will ever read it, but hoping that somehow the creek that gave life to our ranch will carry my words to you. I am coming home. After 15 years of exile that I imposed upon myself, I am finally ready to face you and beg for your forgiveness." Thomas's heart leaped at these words. Caroline was coming home. His lost daughter was returning to the ranch where she belonged. "By the time you read this, I should be no more than a few days behind. This bottle," the letter continued, "I sent it ahead of me down the creek as a way of preparing you for my arrival, and perhaps as a way of testing whether the land we loved still remembers its children. If the creek brings this letter to you, I will take it as a sign that I am truly welcome home." Thomas looked at the date on the letter and felt his heart sink. It was dated nearly a week ago. Caroline should have arrived by now, should have been at the ranch already. Fear began to creep into his joy as he wondered what could have delayed her. "James and the children are with me," Caroline wrote, "and they are nervous about meeting the grandfather they have heard so much about. I have told them stories of your strength and wisdom, of the way you could gentle a wild horse with patience and kindness, of how you taught me that the land would provide for those who respected it. They want very much to know you, if you will have them." The letter concluded with words that made Thomas weep openly. "Papa, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness after all these years of silence. I know that my absence may have caused you and Mama pain that words cannot heal. But if there is any love left in your heart for the foolish girl who ran away all those years ago, please know that she never stopped loving you and never stopped missing the home where she learned what family truly means. Your loving daughter, Caroline. Thomas sat by the creek for a long time, reading and rereading Caroline's letter, letting the reality of it sink into his consciousness. His daughter was alive. She had children, grandchildren he had never met. She was coming home to the ranch where she belonged. The emptiness that had driven him to the creek's edge with thoughts of ending his life had been transformed in an instant into anticipation and hope. But where was she? The letter was dated 6 days ago and even allowing for difficult travel conditions. Caroline and her family should have reached the ranch by now. As Thomas stood to return to his house, his mind raced with possibilities, most of them troubling. Bandits still operated in the territory, and the roads between Colorado and Arizona were dangerous for families traveling with children. The walk back to his house felt different than the desperate journey to the creek had been. Thomas moved with purpose now, his mind already planning what needed to be done. He would ride out in the morning, following the main road toward Colorado, searching for any sign of Caroline and her family. He would contact the territorial authorities, organize search parties if necessary. As he entered his house, Thomas looked around with new eyes. The rooms that had felt like a mausoleum now seemed to be waiting for life to return to them. Caroline's old bedroom was exactly as she had left it 15 years ago, and Thomas imagined how his grandchildren would react to seeing their mother's childhood treasures. He lit oil lamps throughout the house and began the process of preparing for guests. There was cleaning to be done, supplies to be gathered, and plans to be made. For the first time in years, Thomas Hartwell had something to live for, someone to hope for, and a future that stretched beyond his own grief. The bottle that had saved his life sat on his kitchen table, and beside it lay the letter that had transformed his despair into hope. Caroline was coming home, and Thomas intended to be ready for her, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The creek had given him life twice now, first by providing water for his ranch, and now by delivering the message that pulled him back from the brink of surrender. Thomas Hartwell was going to see his daughter again, and meet the grandchildren who carried his legacy forward into the future. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Hartwell ranch as Thomas saddled his best horse, a sturdy bay mare named Patience, who had carried him faithfully for the past 8 years. The letter from Caroline lay folded in his shirt pocket, close to his heart, while her bottle sat prominently on his mantelpiece as a reminder that miracles could still happen, even in the darkest moments. If this story of hope against all odds is moving you, make sure you're subscribed to our channel for more incredible tales from the frontier. Thomas had spent the sleepless night making preparations for his search. He packed supplies for a week-long journey, checked his weapons, and left detailed instructions with his foreman, Miguel Santos, about managing the ranch in his absence. But most importantly, he had studied every map he owned, plotting the most likely routes Caroline and her family would have taken from Colorado. Seagur Hartwell, Miguel said as Thomas mounted his horse, "You are sure about this? Maybe they are just delayed by weather or wagon trouble. Maybe they will arrive today while you are gone." Thomas had known Miguel for over 20 years and trusted him completely. The Mexican had become more than an employee. He was the closest thing to family Thomas had left on the ranch. "Miguel, I have a feeling something's wrong," Thomas replied, settling into his saddle. That letter was dated 6 days ago. Even with children and traveling slowly, they should have been here by now. "What if I am wrong to let you go alone?" Miguel asked. "You are not a young man anymore, and the roads are dangerous." Thomas smiled grimly. "Old friend, I've been riding these trails since before you were born. Besides, I have something to live for now that I didn't have yesterday. That makes all the difference." The main road between Arizona Territory and Colorado was actually a collection of interconnected trails that wound through desert, mountains, and high plains. Thomas knew that Caroline and her family would most likely have followed the established route, through Flagstaff and down through the Verde Valley, the safest and most reliable path for travelers with children. As Thomas rode north from his ranch, he stopped at every settlement, trading post, and way station along the route, showing Caroline's old photograph and describing the family he was seeking. Most people were helpful but had no information to offer. A doctor named James Sullivan traveling with a woman and 2 children would have been memorable, but no one recalled seeing such a group. It wasn't until Thomas reached the town of Jerome, a mining community perched precariously on the mountainside, that he finally found someone who had seen Caroline's family. "Yeah, I remember them," said Pete Kowalski, the owner of the town's only hotel. "Nice family. The doc treated my boy's broken arm, wouldn't take any payment for it. Said he was just passing through and wanted to help." Thomas felt his heart race. "When was this? How long ago?" "Let me think. Tuesday of last week. Maybe Wednesday." They stayed one night, then headed down toward Phoenix. Lady seemed real anxious to get home, kept talking about seeing her father again after many years. That timeline matched Caroline's letter perfectly. Thomas thanked Kowalski and continued his search with renewed hope. At least he knew he was on the right trail. The road south from Jerome was treacherous, winding through narrow canyons and crossing several streams that could become torrents during storms. Thomas pushed patience hard, covering ground quickly while scanning the landscape for any signs of trouble. It was near Sunset Point, where the road crossed a deep ravine on a wooden bridge, that Thomas found what he had been dreading: fresh wagon. Tracks led off the main road toward the ravine, and scattered among the rocks below were pieces of wood that looked like they had come from a broken wagon. Thomas's heart sank as he carefully made his way down into the ravine. At the bottom, partially hidden by brush and debris, he found the remains of a wagon that had clearly tumbled from the bridge above. The wagon bed was smashed, personal belongings were scattered across the rocky ground, and there were clear signs that someone had been hurt in the accident, but there were no bodies. And that gave Thomas hope. He found medical supplies scattered among the debris, confirming that this had indeed been Caroline's wagon. But he also found evidence that the family had survived the crash and had been rescued, or had managed to continue on foot. Among the scattered belongings, Thomas discovered a child's doll and a small leather journal. The journal contained entries in Caroline's handwriting, documenting their journey from Colorado and her growing excitement about returning home. October 8th, one entry read, "We should reach Papa's ranch in 3 more days. The children are tired of traveling, but Emma keeps asking questions about her grandfather. I've told her so many stories about him that she feels like she already knows him. I pray he will forgive me and welcome us with the love I remember from my childhood." Thomas clutched the journal to his chest, overwhelmed by emotion. Caroline had been thinking of him, looking forward to their reunion with the same intensity he now felt. But where was she? What had happened after the wagon accident? The search takes a dramatic turn. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to see how this father's desperate quest leads to an incredible discovery. Thomas spent the rest of the day searching the area around the crash site, looking for clues about which direction Caroline's family had gone. He found tracks leading away from the ravine, following what appeared to be a game trail toward the east. The tracks included those of a man, a woman, and 2 children, which matched Caroline's family perfectly. As evening approached, Thomas made camp near the crash site and continued his search by fire. Light. It was then that he made a discovery that filled him with both hope and concern. Hidden under an overturned piece of the wagon, he found a hastily written note in James Sullivan's handwriting. October 10th, wagon destroyed in bridge collapse. Caroline injured but conscious. Emma has broken arm. Thomas unharmed. Following old Indian trail toward mining camp marked on map. Need help. Dr. J. Sullivan. The note was clearly meant to be found by searchers, and it told Thomas everything he needed to know. Caroline's family had survived the accident, but they were injured and lost in the wilderness. The old Indian trail James mentioned was familiar to Thomas. It led to an abandoned silver mine about 10 miles east of the main road. Thomas broke camp before dawn and followed the trail eastward, pushing patience as hard as he dared over the rough terrain. The path was barely visible in places, marked only by occasional piles of stones left by long-gone travelers. But Thomas knew this country intimately, Having ridden these trails for decades while building his ranch empire. As the sun climbed higher, Thomas began to see signs of recent passage, broken branches, disturbed earth, and at one point, a piece of torn fabric that looked like it had come from a woman's dress. He was definitely on the right trail, but the signs suggested that Caroline's family was struggling. Moving slowly and possibly becoming weaker, the abandoned mine came into view just after noon. A collection of weathered buildings and rusted equipment scattered across a small valley. Thomas had been here before, years ago when the mine was still operating, and he knew there was a spring nearby that would provide fresh water for stranded travelers. As Thomas approached the main building, he heard something that made his heart leap, the sound of children's voices. He dismounted quickly and called out, "Caroline, Caroline, it's Papa. I'm here." The voices stopped abruptly. Then Thomas heard footsteps and the sound of someone moving cautiously toward the door. When it opened, Thomas found himself face to face with his daughter for the first time in 15 years. Caroline was older, of course, her brown hair now streaked with silver and her face marked by the experiences of her adult life. But her eyes were the same warm brown he remembered, and when she saw him, they filled with tears of joy and relief. "Papa," she whispered, hardly believing what she was seeing. "How did you find us?" Thomas swept his daughter into his arms, feeling 15 years of grief and longing melt away in an instant. "I got your letter, darling. The creek brought it to me just when I needed it most." Behind Caroline, Thomas could see a tall man with a doctor's bag and 2 children who hung back shyly, unsure of this stranger who made their mother cry happy tears. James Sullivan stepped forward and extended his hand. "Mr. Hartwell, I'm James Sullivan. I can't tell you how grateful we are to see you." Thomas shook his son-in-law's hand warmly, immediately liking the man's honest face and firm grip. "Doctor, thank you for taking care of my daughter all these years. Now let me help take care of all of you." The reunion was everything Thomas had dreamed of and more. His granddaughter Emma was indeed the image of her grandmother at that age, while young Thomas had inherited the Hartwell stubborn streak, along with his grandfather's blue eyes. Both children were tired and scared from their ordeal, but they warmed quickly to the grandfather they had traveled so far to meet. "Grandpa," Emma said shyly, "Mama told us you have horses and cattle and know everything about living in the wild." Thomas knelt down to her level, smiling at the wonder in her voice. "Well, I know a few things, and I'd be happy to teach them to you and your brother, if you'd like to learn." As they prepared to return to the ranch, Thomas learned about the accident that had nearly cost him the chance to meet his grandchildren. The bridge had collapsed just as their wagon was crossing, sending them tumbling into the ravine. Caroline had suffered a severe concussion, Emma had broken her arm, and all of them had been bruised and shaken. James had managed to get his family to safety and had been caring for their injuries as best he could with limited supplies. They had been at the mine for 3 days, hoping someone would find them, but growing weaker as their food ran out. "I was starting to think we might not make it," James admitted as they loaded their rescued belongings onto Thomas's pack horse. "Caroline kept saying her father would find us, but I wasn't sure anyone even knew we were missing." Thomas helped Caroline onto Patience's back, then lifted young Thomas up behind her. Emma rode with James on his horse, her broken arm carefully supported in a sling her father had fashioned. "Caroline," Thomas said as they began the journey home, "I want you to know that I never stopped looking for you. Not a day passed that I didn't wonder where you were and pray that you were safe and happy." Caroline reached down to squeeze her father's hand. "Papa, I'm sorry for all the lost years. I was too proud and too ashamed to come home, but I never stopped loving you and Mama." As they rode toward the ranch that had been waiting 15 years for Caroline's return, Thomas felt a contentment he hadn't experienced since Martha's death. His family was together again, and the future that had seemed empty and meaningless just days ago now stretched ahead filled with possibilities. The bottle in the creek had saved more than just Thomas's life. It had reunited a family and given him the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to know his grandchildren and to share his remaining years with the daughter he thought he had lost forever. The return to the Hartwell Ranch was a journey of rediscovery for everyone involved. As they rode across the familiar landscape, Caroline pointed out landmarks to her children, sharing memories of her childhood while Thomas listened with a heart full of gratitude for this second chance at family. Join us for the incredible conclusion of this heartwarming tale that proves love can overcome any distance or time. Subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories of reunion and redemption. That's where your mama learned to ride, Thomas told Emma as they passed a small corral near the house. She was about your age when she insisted she was ready for a full-sized horse instead of her little pony. Did she fall off? Young Thomas asked with the fascination children have for their parents' childhood mishaps. More times than I could count, Thomas laughed, but she always got back on. Your mama was the most determined little girl in the territory. Caroline smiled at the memory, feeling the years of separation melting away as they approached the house she had dreamed of seeing again. The ranch looked smaller than she remembered, but it was still beautiful. Nestled in the valley with Willow Creek running along its eastern border, Miguel Santos and his wife Rosa had been watching for their return, and they came out to greet the family with warm smiles and curious eyes. Miguel had known Caroline as a child and was overjoyed to see her again, while Rosa immediately took charge of caring for the injured family members. Segura Caroline, Rosa said, embracing the younger woman, "You are home where you belong, and these beautiful children, they have the Hartwell eyes, no doubt about it." The first week at the ranch was a time of healing and adjustment. James treated Emma's broken arm properly and monitored Caroline's recovery from her concussion, while the children explored their new surroundings with the wonder of city kids. Discovering the freedom of ranch life, Thomas threw himself into being a grandfather with the enthusiasm of a man making up for lost time. He taught Emma how to milk cows and gather eggs, showed young Thomas how to identify animal tracks and red weather signs, and spent hours telling them stories of their mother's childhood adventures. "Your mama once caught a fish this big," Thomas told his grandchildren one evening, spreading his arms wide as they sat by Willow Creek. "She was so proud of that fish. She made your grandma Martha cook it for Sunday dinner, even though it was full of bones. Tell them about the time I tried to tame that wild Mustang." Caroline laughed, settling beside her father on the creek bank. "I was convinced I could gentle any horse if I just talked to it sweetly." Enough of these evening sessions by the creek became a family tradition, with James often joining them after finishing his medical consultations with neighboring ranchers. The doctor had quickly established himself as an invaluable resource for the scattered homesteaders who had previously had to travel days to find medical care. Dr. Sullivan, Mrs. Patterson from the neighboring spread told Thomas one day, "Your son-in-law has been a godsend. He saved my husband's life when that horse kicked him, and he won't take proper payment for his services." Thomas felt proud of the man Caroline had chosen to marry. James was clearly dedicated to helping others, and he treated Caroline and the children with the kind of gentle respect that reminded Thomas of his own relationship with Martha. As autumn turned to winter, the family settled into routines that felt both new and ancient. Caroline helped Rosa with the household management while also establishing a small school for the children of the neighboring ranches. Emma and young Thomas thrived in the outdoor environment, growing stronger and more confident with each passing week. But it was during the quiet evening hours that the most important healing took place. Caroline and Thomas spent countless hours talking, filling in the gaps of their 15-year separation and rebuilding the bond that had been damaged by pride and misunderstanding. "Papa," Caroline said one night as they sat by the fireplace, "I need you to know how sorry I am for the way I left. I was so angry about William, so convinced that you couldn't understand what I was feeling." Thomas reached over and took his daughter's hand. "Caroline, I was wrong too. I should have trusted your judgment, should have tried to understand what you saw in that man instead of just forbidding the relationship you were trying to protect me," Caroline replied. "And you were right about William. He was exactly the kind of man you said he was. I was just too proud to admit it until it was too late." James, who had been reading nearby, looked up from his book. "If I may say so, both of you were trying to do what you thought was best for someone you loved. That's not something to regret. Even if the methods weren't perfect, the emotional healing reaches its most powerful moment Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to witness how this family finds complete redemption. The turning point in their healing came on a cold December evening, when young Thomas fell seriously ill with a fever that spiked dangerously high. James worked tirelessly to bring the boy's temperature down, but as the night wore on, it became clear that this was beyond ordinary childhood illness. Caroline sat by her son's bedside, holding his small hand and whispering prayers, while Thomas paced the room feeling helpless and terrified. The thought of losing this grandchild he had only just discovered was unbearable. "There's something else we can try," James said finally, his face grave with exhaustion. "It's an old remedy I learned from a Navajo medicine man. It involves using the natural minerals in creek water, but I've never attempted it on someone so young." Without hesitation, Thomas volunteered to ride out in the snowstorm to collect water from a specific mineral spring he knew in the mountains. "If there's even a chance it will help, I'll get that water." Caroline grabbed her father's arm. "Papa, you can't ride out in this weather. It's too dangerous." Thomas looked at his daughter with eyes full of determination. "Caroline, I lost 15 years with you because of my stubbornness. I won't lose a moment more with any of my family because I was too cautious to try." The ride to the mineral spring was treacherous, with snow falling heavily and wind howling through the canyons. But Thomas pushed through, driven by love for his grandson and the desperate need to help his family. When he returned hours later, ice-covered and exhausted, he carried precious bottles of the mineral-rich water James needed. The treatment worked. Young Thomas's fever broke just before dawn, and by evening he was sitting up in bed asking for food. The family's relief was overwhelming, but the crisis had also served to bind them together in ways that ordinary time couldn't have accomplished. "Grandpa," young Thomas said weakly as Thomas sat by his bedside, "Mama told me you rode through a blizzard to get medicine for me." "I'd ride through 100 blizzards for you, son," Thomas replied, stroking the boy's hair. "That's what grandfathers do." As winter gave way to spring, the ranch began to feel truly alive again for the first time since Martha's death. Caroline's laughter filled the house, the children's voices echoed across the yard, and James's presence brought a sense of completion to the family circle. Thomas found himself thinking often of the bottle that had started it all, the green glass container that had appeared in Willow Creek at exactly the moment he needed it most. He had placed it on the mantelpiece as a reminder of miracles, but now he understood that the real miracle hadn't been finding the bottle, it had been the courage to choose life over despair. "Caroline," he said one morning as they watched Emma and young Thomas help Miguel with the horses, "I want you to know that bottle of yours saved more than just my life. It gave me back my purpose, my family, my reason for living." Caroline smiled and linked her arm through her father's. "Papa, I think that creek has been bringing our family together for generations. It gave us water for the ranch, it carried my message to you, and now it's where your grandchildren are learning to fish just like I did." As spring bloomed across the Arizona landscape, Thomas Hartwell knew that his remaining years would be filled with the joy he had thought was lost forever. The ranch would continue for another generation, tended by loving hands and filled with the laughter of children who carried forward the best of the Hartwell legacy. The bottle remained on the mantelpiece, no longer just a reminder of a desperate moment, but a symbol of hope, redemption, and the mysterious ways that love finds a path through even the darkest circumstances. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of despair transformed into hope. Thomas Hartwell's story reminds us that even in our darkest moments, love can find a way to reach us and guide us back to light. If this story of family, forgiveness, and second chances moved you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and share this tale with others who need to hear that it's never too late for redemption. Let us know in the comments what moment of this story touched your heart most. Years later, when Thomas was telling his great-grandchildren about the night he found the bottle in Willow Creek, he would always end the story the same way. Sometimes when we think we've lost everything, we're really just being prepared to receive something even more wonderful than what we had before. The creek continued to flow past the ranch, carrying water and memories, dreams and hopes, just as it had for generations. And on quiet evenings, When the family gathered by its banks to watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, they could almost hear the water whispering stories of love that transcends time, distance, and even death itself. Thomas Hartwell had gone to the creek to end his life, but instead he had found the beginning of the most beautiful chapter his family had ever known. The bottle had carried more than just a letter. It had carried the promise that love never truly dies. It just sometimes takes unexpected paths to find its way home. Controls Duchet Sonnet 4.